Hi everyone, this is Dr. Charity. Welcome back to the Mo Better Life. And today we are making Nigerian tomato stew with yam. The first thing we need to do is wash our vegetables and wash our mushrooms. So what we have here is 2 red onions, and what we're going to do is with one of them we're going to saute the onions, and the other one is going to be used to blend to make the stew along with the rest of these vegetables. Let's get to it. So this pot is going to be used to saute my mushrooms, and this one is going to be used to cook the stew. Got my bench scraper today, so it's easy to pick up all my vegetables very easily. I'm cutting all the vegetables. So right now I'm cutting bell peppers. So we have 3 bell peppers here, and I'm gonna cut all 3 of them. And you don't have to cut them small, you just wanna cut it enough so that it fits in the blender and it blends very well. Red bell peppers, because this is like a red stew. When I cut bell peppers, I start off by cutting the stem first, and then I open it up, and then I take out the seeds and some of the white parts, just taking the white parts out. And then I just basically go rinse out the rest of these seeds over the sink, just like that. So then you can just kind of tear it into some pieces and then pop it in the blender, just so that everything can fit in there. These are the Habanero Peppers. I have 3 of them. If you don't like spice, you probably want to go with 2, but I like spice. I'm gonna put 3 of them in there. I try to put them towards the bottom of the blender so they can blend very well. Then you got your Roma tomatoes for the tomato stew. And then I have about 2 inches of ginger. Okay, so this all won't fit, so I usually do a initial blend, and then once I get all this down, then I'll add the rest of the tomatoes in there. And then for the ginger, I just kind of get the skin off. Some people just blend it with the skin. You can do that. There you go, so you got your ginger peeled. So let's put about a cup of water in here and then blend it. We might have to add more a little bit later, but let's see. You need some water in order for the blender to properly move everything. Okay. So you see, as you blend, the rest of this has come down, so now you can fit the rest of your stuff in the blender. All right, and you blend it again. That's good enough. So everything seems to be blended together nicely. This is a pretty powerful blender, so for this one, I only had to blend it for like 2 minutes. But before I had this kind of blender, I had an old school blender where you were sitting there for a minute. So it depends on whatever blender you have at home. I would say focus more on watching the actual thing you're blending and blend it until your desired smoothness. Let's cut our mushrooms so that we can saute it while we cook our stew. And then we'll also need to cut the yam because that needs to be boiled as well. Cutting shiitake mushrooms, the tip of it is very fibrous and thick. I don't like to keep the tip of the stem, so I cut that off. It's not very nice to chew. So most people are going to use meat when they make their stew. Since we're plant-based, I usually use mushrooms and chickpeas or like soy curls in my stew. For the mushrooms, I use 2 packs of 3.5 ounces of shiitake mushrooms. So I'm gonna get the mushrooms sauteing on the stove and also start cooking the stew. While these are cooking, I'm going to be cutting the yam and boiling it. Let's put that on high heat. Half a cup of water. Same thing here, half a cup of water to saute the onions. We're also gonna cook down the tomato paste as well. This is tomato sauce. I sometimes add a little bit more tomato sauce to make it saucier. Leave this going at high heat. I'm gonna add a little bit of seasoning here so that the mushrooms can have some flavor while they cook. So maybe about a teaspoon of all-purpose seasoning. I use Joe's Kansas City French fry seasoning. And then I have some smoked paprika here. I usually cook my mushrooms in smoked paprika. Put another teaspoon there.
So beloved, so this is where you add the tomato paste?
So I'm adding tomato paste right here. So I'm adding it first before I add the stew because I want the tomato paste to cook down. It helps to get this metallic taste out of it. So while the onions are sauteing, I'm also cooking down the tomato paste, and I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and smoked paprika to this while this tomato paste cooks down. A teaspoon of all-purpose French fry seasoning, and a teaspoon of smoked paprika again.
Yeah, I'm actually learning this myself. I can finally make stew.
Yep. Most people, when they're making stew, they're cooking this with oil. I'm using water here because I don't usually need oil in order to have a good stew. And then it takes away some of the bad cholesterols. Oil is not really a health food, so we avoid it if we don't need it. But occasionally we use it. All right, so you can see this is starting to cook down here. I'm gonna turn the heat down. I mentioned this before, but I use a green pan in order to cook because it's non-stick, non-toxic, and it allows me to cook oil-free. But I still add a little bit of water, but mushrooms themselves release water, so you're gonna see water getting released, and the flavor also getting released. So after this, I'm also gonna cook the chickpeas, so these are gonna be the proteins, the substances that go into the stew. So in order for the chickpeas to also be able to saute, I'm gonna add a little bit more water.
Meanwhile,
Moving this around so it doesn't burn. This looks like it's good, so I'm going to add the stew so I can just kind of let that cook down while I focus on the other stuff. Gonna rinse this out a little bit so I don't waste. Gonna add a little tomato sauce, and then gonna mix it all together. Turn the heat up a little bit. Then you're gonna add your Maggi cubes. These are not Maggi cubes. Let me just show you what this is. So these are vegan bouillon, not beef, but they're like beef flavored bouillon cubes. I'm gonna put 2 of them in there. Very good. And then I'm also gonna add some mushroom seasoning in here. About a little tablespoon of mushroom seasoning. So let's focus on this. I'm adding about a 1/3 cup of water this time. It's starting to dry out. All right. So now we're gonna open up our chickpeas. So this is a reduced sodium version of our garbanzo beans or chickpeas, whatever you like to call it. I like a lot of beans, high in protein. So I typically will have beans in my stew. Just rinsing it out. All right. So there, pop them in there. So now you have protein that will go in your stew. Your body needs protein for everything. So for cell development, for your brain to work properly, for building muscles. So protein is very essential. And a lot of people feel like just because you're plant-based, you won't be getting enough protein. There's a lot of plant-based sources of protein, which I experiment with a lot. And you'll see it on this channel. We experiment with a lot of plant-based sources of protein that are better for you than animal-based proteins. We use chickpeas, we use tofu, seitan, which we'll show you on this channel. I would say maybe about a teaspoon for that one. And then the paprika again. A little over a teaspoon for that, just to flavor it while it cooks. The chickpeas are also going to take the flavor of the mushrooms, which have a umami flavor. Cooking them together like this allows them to mix flavors and really makes them taste pretty good. All right, so now we're gonna focus on seasoning the stew a little bit more. Gonna mix it around, making sure our bouillon cube has broken up. So I usually just kind of press it against the side, just to make sure it's broken up in there. We're gonna add a tablespoon of curry powder.
curry.
We're gonna add 2 bay leaves. We're gonna add a teaspoon of garlic powder.
So the bay leaves go in a Ziploc bag.
Yeah, so that it can be preserved. Give it a little taste to see how we did with our seasoning. Nice and spicy. Might need a little bit of salt there, but we can wait until we finish adding this before we add more salt so that we can kind of see how the flavor is once we combine the protein with the stew. So the chickpeas are already cooked if you get it out of a can. You also can buy the chickpeas dried and uncooked. That will take you a little bit longer. You have to cook that. But I don't mind just getting it out of a can. So the only thing we're really just doing is heating it up and flavoring it. So now we can combine this with the stew. So just bringing this closer so it's easier to work with. Overall, you're gonna really be cooking this for about 20 minutes because you wanna get some of the water boiled out of it. So this is actually still gonna cook more once I add this. But once I add these, it's gonna get thicker. Gingerly add your proteins. So I'm just gonna taste it again. So now that I've added the chickpeas and the shiitake mushrooms, I just wanna see what the flavor is like now. Very good, nice and spicy, full of flavor. Gonna let it cook a little bit more before I add anything else because sometimes when the water absorbs, the flavors get more concentrated. So I just like this to cook a little bit more before I add any more seasonings. But the spices is where we need it to be. But if you don't like too much spice, you might want to do 2 habaneros instead of 3. Or if you really don't like spice, take the seeds out of the habanero. But I like it spice. So this is probably going to end up cooking for maybe about a total of maybe 30 minutes. So about 20 minutes before I added the proteins and about 10 more minutes after adding the protein. And so I'm just gonna put the top on a little bit just so it doesn't splash everywhere, but I'm not gonna completely cover it because I want the water to absorb. So I'm just gonna cut the yam while this is going and probably turn this down to more of a medium heat. All right, so I'm just cutting this yam down. It's looking good so far. I think this is a Ghanaian yam I got from the Nigerian store, but I think most people think of sweet potatoes when they think of yams, but Nigerians, we think of this when we think of yams. White on the inside, brown on the outside.
Sweet potatoes.
When you're eating a banana, there's a spot on there that's not good. I'm not eating it. You know, just like, you know, a potato, you want to inspect the area if there's any areas that look questionable, and I cut it out. And with your stew, you can really eat it with anything. You know, it's very versatile. So that tomato stew is the base for a lot of things that we make. So one of my favorite things is to make efo, which is basically just vegetable stew. Basically, I just add spinach to the stew, and that allows me to have more iron. All right, so basically then I just cut this down. So I cut this down, and now I go rinse this off. That's rinsed off, so now we just boil it. Boil it until soft. So I just fill it up with water until this is covered. Some people fry their yam, but I just boil it. I just make sure the yam is covered up nicely. And then you boil it like you would boil potatoes. You check on it with a fork to make sure that it is tender, or you just cook some rice and eat it with rice. Can't forget, you gotta salt your yam if you're gonna boil it. So maybe about a tablespoon of salt. This is pretty much almost done here. You see now it's thickened, it's not as watery as it was before. It has a little thickness, you know, stays on the spoon a little bit more. So you don't need to be too thick, but you just don't want it to be watery. And adding the beans does help in it thicken a little bit too. So let's see here. It does need a tiny bit of salt, but it's very delicious. I'm gonna turn the heat down a little bit so it doesn't splash. Yeah, when I say salt, so this is more like if you have bouillon, or you can put regular salt. I'm putting mushroom flavor because it has a little bit more dimension to the flavor, a little bit umami. So this is about a little less than a tablespoon here. Well, you can put probably a full tablespoon, but you just salt it to taste. You got to taste it and figure out what level of saltiness is good for you. All right, so we're gonna taste it one more time. Always taste your food. Yep, that's where it needs to be. That is just delicious. The only thing it needs a little bit of, I would say that I should have added in the beginning, but I could add it now. A tablespoon of garlic, fresh garlic. Just gonna add a little bit of garlic in there. So let that cook so the flavor can also mix just for a few minutes, but it's pretty much done at this point. We're just waiting for the yam to cook, and we'll be ready to enjoy. Can I get to the yams? Create a little bit of pressure in there. So this is done, really, just staying hot on low heat. This one I'm gonna cook until I can stick a fork in it. 10, 20 minutes, something like that. All right, so just checking it now. It's almost done, actually. It'll be 5 more minutes, and then ready to eat it. Another thing that you could do if you don't like your yam to be too soft and you want a bit of crisp in it, you can pop it in the air fryer, and you can have more of a crispy yam. Just gonna strain the yam, nice and soft. So you got a little bit of that. With some stew. All right, so it's just a nice little taste test there. Of course, you can add more yam to it if you want to, but this is just so that we can give it a taste.
So you know if I'm in the shot, you know what that means? It means it's time to eat.
Let's do this.
Although, finally now that you've made this, I can actually know how to cook this, because I gotta admit, and I ain't the only one, but okay. I can now know how to make this. I eat it all the time from you.
Yeah.
It's oil-free, plant-based, meatless, but it has enough protein for you to have enough nutrients like meat. That's correct, right?
That's correct. And I mean, you can always, and this serves as a base, so if you want to add more protein to it later, or if you want to make vegetable effal soup, you could do that. And so it's very versatile. So the aunties have been asking for this. So a lot of aunties have been asking, how can I make my stew oil-free and meatless? And so this is a response to some of the aunties' requests, Niger aunties, of how they can do this. So this is a very helpful video for a lot of people.
All right, so here we go. I already know how it's gonna taste, so I'm not even surprised. I'm just gonna get a little bit. I'm not gonna get a big bite, because every time I make big bites, you always clown me.
I'm not gonna say nothing this time, I swear.
It did drop though for a second. Oh, come on, this is great.
Trying to be conservative.
I mean, the spice is there and everything. Yeah, it's really good.
It's delicious.
Come on, man, you already know how it goes. You already know your food is good.
Oh yeah. Too easy.
Too easy.
Too easy.
One of these days, I'm gonna make a video of how to actually make this.
Yeah.
Man knows how to make, or man cooks.
Yeah, husband follows wife's recipe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, husband follows wife's recipe. All right.
Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Mo Better Life.
Oh, beloved.
Come on, family dog.
Her name is Beloved, like the movie. Beloved.
You like being on TV, beloved?
What's up, Beloved? Can you eat this?
Yeah.
Straight up.
She likes chickpeas.
Eating that chickpeas.
Yep.
All right.
That's all we got. See ya.